Straight ahead, sounding off a hearing at the Texas Capitol about students using taxpayer money to attend private school lasts more than 22 hours. We speak with the House Republican leading the effort to pass this and opponents who are pushing back. Rare opening, Texas Comptroller Glenn Hager is heading to the Texas A&M University system, leaving a vacancy in a statewide office. What he says about the state's budget surplus and cutting property taxes. And food fight. There's a real beef between Texas and New York over steak, and Texas leaders are busting each other's chops over it too. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and happy Sunday to you, and welcome to Eye on Politics. We begin with hundreds of people sounding off at the Texas Capitol over Governor Abbott's push for spending $1 billion in taxpayer money for students to attend private school. The hearing Tuesday before the House Public Education Committee lasted more than 22 hours. This debate is part of a larger fight over funding for public schools in Texas. I spoke with the chair of the House Public Education Committee, Republican State Representative Brad Buckley of Salado, who wrote the two big school choice and school funding bills, also called the Texas Two-Step. I asked him what guarantees his bill has to ensure low-income students and those with disabilities will not only be prioritized for the program, but will actually be enrolled in the program.
Well, you know, history bears that out. When you look across the country, we know that most families love their public schools. And, you know, if there are issues there, they can solve them. You know, my wife and I were very pleased with the education that our kids received in public schools, and we never really, you know, thought of moving them to a private school. But families that do have concerns sometimes, typically are families that have special education children, and often low-income families. And so we know that this bill prioritizes our special education students and low-income students to give them the opportunities that those families deserve when kids, you know, when it's just not a good fit for kids, or there's lots of reasons families would make that decision, but it's important that they be given the priority to do so.
But you're confident that the program, and at least how it's set up in your bill, would, you know, make available to these low-income students?
Yes, you know, there seemed to be concern that private schools wouldn't educate kids with special needs, but the data doesn't bear that out. As a matter of fact, our private schools have a higher percentage of special education students within their enrollment than public schools. It's about 19% of the enrollment in our private schools are kids with special needs. Now that varies from dyslexia to sometimes some very advanced learning disorders and other disabilities. In the end, you want the best outcome for the kid. And you know, so that's why I think it's important to understand that making sure that a child is enrolled in the proper setting to meet the challenges they have is really where you get the benefit of this of school choice.
This issue is part of the larger debate over public school funding, and your bill, House Bill 2, proposes what, up to $9 billion?
Yeah, House Bill 2, along with some other bills that we'll be hearing in our committee, will make the largest investment in our public schools in the history of the state of Texas, even when you adjust it for inflation.
The Democrats say it's still not enough because the basic allotment hasn't changed from 2019. It's about $6,200 per student. You've proposed adding it by another $220.
That's correct.
And the Democrats say it really needs to be an additional $1,400, more than $7,500. What's your reaction to that?
My reaction to that is that our public education funding formula is more complicated than that. The reality is if you just look at basic allotment, you don't get true equitable funding for kids, because kids all over Texas from district to district really have different needs. And so in our bill, we increase the basic allotment, but we also increase special education funding by nearly $2 billion.
Teacher pay raises.
Yeah, 40% of all new money goes for compensation increases, and that includes teachers. They get the bulk of that, but also a percentage of that goes to other important people in our public schools, our bus drivers, our nutrition workers, our custodians, our maintenance people. It looks at all of the different jobs and careers that are necessary to have great public schools, and it provides pay raises for everyone except for administration.
We've seen the Senate Bill 26 that passed.
Yeah.
There are certain amounts for teachers depending on their experience level and if they're teaching in a rural district or a suburban urban district. So, I mean, is there a finite number that people can actually see and understand?
Well, it'll really vary by district to district, because the way the funding formula works, based on the size of the district, whether or not they're a small or mid-sized school district, we put over $1 billion to fund our small and mid-sized schools, because they don't benefit from the economies of scale of the very large districts. And so that will drive higher pay raises to our rural districts, while still providing substantial pay raises for the urban and suburban districts. And so what you'll see is really a local control, a percentage required, but you'll see districts be able to have more flexibility of what they need to do to make the pay raise that fits their market.
In our area, and I'm sure there are other areas in the state as well, we're seeing school districts closing schools. We're seeing school districts pass deficit budgets. So what's going on here? I mean, they say that the state really didn't, I mean, they were expecting more money in the last session and they didn't get it. $4.5 billion didn't make it to them. So is that to blame?
Well, you're seeing lots of different reasons. You know, we have 1,000 plus ISDs, 200 and something charter schools for a total of 1,200 and something public school districts, if you will, in Texas. And it varies district to district. Of course, the inflationary environment of the last few years is impacted families, businesses, my veterinary clinic, the organization you work for. It just costs more to do everything. So our school districts.
So should the school districts should their budgets or what they receive from the state reflect that?
It reflects the largest investment in the history of Texas. And so what we seek to do is to understand the type of investment that we need to make to get the right teacher pay, to help them balance their budgets.
Democratic State Representative John Bryant of Dallas also sits on the House Public Education Committee, and I asked about predictions by Governor Greg Abbott and Speaker Dustin Burrows that school choice will pass this time in the House.
I'm very concerned about it. Governor Abbott has made this a priority, and he's putting pressure on members to vote for it. I'm mostly concerned about it because it will seriously undermine public education in Texas, which is we're already 44th in the nation in the state effort that we make to educate our children. This will make it even worse by spending $1 billion to encourage children to leave public schools and go to private schools, and it's also incentivizing people that might want to be paid $2,000 per child to take their child out of school and homeschool them.
And so let me ask you, because as far as the money that will go to private schools and this whole program, Republicans say this is not coming from the foundational public school program that funds public schools. Instead, it's going to be funded from the nearly $24 billion surplus. So what do you say to that?
It's ridiculous, because when we say, let's stop being 44th in the nation in the state contribution to public education, let's be 25th and spend some of those billions on public education. They say, oh, we just can't afford to do it. Well, we certainly can afford to do it. We have plenty of money to do it. The problem is that the Republican push is toward privatizing public education.
The Republicans say in the Senate and the House, they really want to prioritize these education savings accounts for mainly low-income people, low-income families, and disabled students. What's your thought about that?
All you have to do is read the bill. A person who makes a family of four who makes $160,000 a year, a wife, a husband, and 2 children, will receive a $10,000 per student voucher to go to private schools. Those are not poor people. Those are folks that are doing quite well.
We also spoke with Bob Popinski, the Senior Director of Policy at the public education advocacy group Raise Your Hand Texas. Here's his reaction to comments by Chair Buckley and Speaker Burrows that House Bill 2 represents the largest school finance bill in Texas history.
Yeah, the fiscal note came back at about $7.5 billion on House Bill 2. That's the legislation that the House heard last week in the House Public Education Committee. There's a lot of moving pieces to it, but it adds $7.5 billion for next biennium. So you have to divide by 2 here because we have a 2-year state budget. So to put that in perspective of where we are in compared to inflation, since 2019 we've seen a 22% increase in inflation. So what does that mean? We need about $9.8 billion per year just to have the same purchasing power school districts did back in 2019. So you put that over a 2-year budget, we need about $20 billion. So we're well short of what we need just to have the same kind of purchasing power we did back in 2019, but it is a really good start, and there's a lot of great moving pieces within that bill.
So $7.5 billion versus more than $20 billion.
That's correct. What they're proposing in House Bill 2 is a $220 increase to the basic allotment. That hasn't been increased since 2019. That rests at $6,160 right now. We would need to increase that basic allotment by $1,300. And so they're proposing a $220 basic allotment increase. But when you look at what Texas is compared to the rest of the country, we're 46th in the nation in per student funding. We're $4,400 below the national average. We've got a long way to go, and this bill, House Bill 2, and the work that they're putting into it this session is a good first start.
So are you pleased with it as a first start, or are you disappointed?
I think it's a good first step, and I hope by the end of the session that number increases drastically.
So the $20 billion that you mentioned before, that's best case scenario, right? That's your wish list.
That's the wish list. That gets us back to where we were in 2019.
And so as far as relative to inflation, costs, et cetera.
That's right.
And so what would be the most realistic thing if you could get it up a little higher?
Yeah, the governor is asking for $10 billion in property tax relief. The same amount of funding for per student funding needs to go for what we're providing for property tax relief.
So an additional $10 billion.
That's correct.
Dollar for dollar.
Dollar for dollar.
Okay. Another issue, obviously, is the school choice bill, the education savings accounts. Republicans have said repeatedly that this money is not coming from foundational school program, which funds public schools. This is going to come from the surplus, this $1 billion. What's wrong with that?
So we are 46th in the nation in per student funding, right? We need $4,400 more just to keep up with the national average. And we do. We have a fairly large surplus going into this legislative session, about $24 billion. It's not the $1 billion that takes place in 26-27. It's what the analysis shows later on of what this voucher bill will cost. By year 5, they have this voucher bill going close to $4 billion per year. That's an $8 billion cost for a 2-year state budget. Every state that has a voucher program that has expanded, per student funding in public schools has gone down, and that's a problem.
What is driving the costs for these school districts? What's the issue? Because we're a growing state, and
Yes.
yet on the same time, there seem to be fewer students in the districts, right?
Absolutely. There is competition out there for traditional independent school districts. There's public charter schools, and so there is enrollment decline. There is kind of birth rate decline as well. So back when I was kind of started off, it was typical that Texas schools would see an increase of about 80,000 kids per year. It's well below that now. But in order to kind of keep up with that inflation cost since 2019, you still have to take kids to school on the bus every day. You still have to offer them food service and hire the cafeteria workers to provide that. You have to have the assistant principals and the principals. You have to have the after-school programs and extracurricular programs. All of that costs money, and all of that, because of inflation pressure, is causing districts to adopt budgets and dip into their fund balance.
Coming up, the rare opening at one of the statewide offices as Texas Comptroller Glenn Hager heads to the Texas A&M University system. what he says about the budget surplus and property tax relief. And later, the beef between Texas and New York over steak when Eye on Politics comes right back. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. It's a rare opening for a statewide office. Texas Comptroller Glenn Hager is the sole finalist to become the chancellor of the Texas A&M University system. Governor Abbott will appoint a successor to fill the role until after the November 2026 election. So far, 2 Republicans have announced they will run for the seat. Christy Craddock, the chair of the Texas Railroad Commission, which oversees the oil and gas industry, and Don Huffines, a businessman who served as a state senator in Dallas and who ran for governor in 2022. I spoke with Comptroller Glenn Hager in January about the state's nearly $24 billion surplus and how it differs from the record $33 billion surplus from 2 years ago. We also discussed property tax relief.
So the growth in the last 2 years, while it was positive, it wasn't this record growth. It was much more modest. So a lot of what we have in the cash carryover balance this session, as the legislature starts on the budget, is really a large part that was left over from last time.
So how much of this nearly $24 billion is left over from the last time?
Yeah, great question. The vast majority of it, a good portion of it, I'd say every bit of half plus more is left over, but then also a piece of it was the legislature last session had intended to add additional dollars into the public education school system. That was $4.5 billion. However, those dollars, that the legislation that was required to enact that funding didn't happen. And so part of this is left over.
Property tax relief is going to be on the table again based on my conversations with lawmakers.
Yeah.
And I believe your agency just published the latest findings from the latest year of 2023.
Yeah.
And it showed that property taxes, despite the property tax cuts, the relief that the legislature passed for school taxes, they still went up by less than 1%, which of course was a lot lower than what they did back in 2022, which led the outcry.
That's correct.
But when you still look at county property taxes, city property taxes, they each went up by 10%, and then the special districts went up 22%.
Right.
So doesn't that just negate everything, really?
Well, you can look at it, these over here negated this, or thankfully the legislature took action over here, or it would be even more. You're not going to swallow the whole apple at one time, but you got to take a bite. You got to try to take a step on solving a problem. And if you solve enough problems, then you get further along to a solution, which is what you and I, the residents of the state, the taxpayers, want.
Now to the trade war between the U.S., Canada, Mexico, China, and the European Union, sparked by President Trump's tariffs. All the back and forth hit the stock market hard last week. Sarah Jenkins has this week's brief.
After threatening to impose a 50% tariff on aluminum and steel imports from Canada, President Trump agreed to reduce it to 25% following a temporary deal. This new 25% tariff on Canada will also apply to all steel and aluminum imports from around the globe. Despite this reduction, Canada is preparing retaliatory tariffs worth $21 billion on U.S. exports, Canadian government officials said. Canada is joined by European Union leaders who plan to impose approximately $28 billion in tariffs on American goods. The trade war has created growing concerns and sparked stock market uncertainty as fears of a potential recession loom. During a recent speech before Congress, the president said tariffs would, quote, cause a little disturbance, and told reporters Tuesday that the market sell-off doesn't concern him and that he, quote, doesn't see a recession. In North Texas, experts warn that we could face rising costs in housing and at grocery stores.
Thanks, Sarah. Up next, the beef between Texas and New York over steak when Eye on Politics returns. Now the food fight between New York and Texas over steak. And Texas leaders are busting each other's chops over it, too. It all started with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick asking on X why the New York Strip isn't called the Texas Strip. The Senate filed a resolution calling the Texas Strip the official steak of Texas. Then a restaurant owner in Albany, New York, filed a $1 million lawsuit against the state of Texas, claiming the name change will hurt New York's culinary heritage. At the same time, the Texas House raised the stakes, you might say, by filing its own resolution saying the tomahawk ribeye should be the official state steak of Texas. And if that's not enough, the lieutenant governor escalated the beef with the Texas House and New York during a visit to Bob's Steak and Chop House in Austin.
So the House thought they were going to bust our chops over the Texas Strip. Let me just tell you, it's already on the menu. It's the Texas Strip, and it says you can enjoy it with shrimp from the Gulf of America. New York, Texas House, come and take it. We win with the Texas Strip.
The lieutenant governor is hoping other restaurants and grocery stores will change the name just like Bob's did, and thinks it will help boost marketing for Texas beef. What about the T-bone? Texas T-bone. I think that has a nice ring to it. What do you think? Well, remember, you can watch all our full interviews from today's show on our YouTube channel. Go to CBS Texas and hit the subscribe button. And that's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening to you at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching, and happy St. Patrick's Day on Monday. I'll see you next week. From all of us here, have a great day.